welcome to all our visitors that are with us first. We're going to talk to the family here in a minute, but to those who are visiting and a lot of your family, we're really glad that you're here and happy to spend some time together with you. I was noticing we do have some traveling. I think they usually sit here because that side's gone. I wanted to mention just as a family, it is kind of cold and flu and whatever else season right now, like to the extreme. And so just be mindful of those who aren't here. I've got several that I had written down. Steve and Ann Schweigert had mentioned this morning they were both not feeling well. They're going to be at home with us online, and so we're wishing them well and a good recovery. The Horton family all stayed in today, kind of being safe from all of that as well. We're thinking of them. Also got a call or message this morning from Laura grieving, and she and Paul were on their way here. But they have a grandchild that was very sick and was taken to the hospital. There, I think, were some allergy issues. So they decided to kind of be there and help the kids out with that today. And so think of the grievings in their grandchild that's ill right now. I had a whole bunch of these, actually. Noticing back Terry from the farm, and so really glad that you're back here. Getting a little rest. Let the grandkids spoil you for a change now, which will be good. And then I wanted to introduce you to Preppy Steve. If you didn't see him earlier, it made my day. I love the sweater over there. See, what most of you don't know about Steve, he will talk to you about skunks, he will talk to you about fun, awesome stuff, but he was raised in a country club and loves boating. So that was Yacht Steve today. And actually, what made me so happy is the vibe I got was that he got to get away with Jenny. And they had a really good trip. It was nice to have the Selfs in town, and I'm sure the girls had good grandparent time. But you came back refreshed, and we're just glad you came back and you got that trip. So glad you're here, and that was a great side of you to share. I liked it. Okay, that's kind of all those little announcements that I had to make before we jump right in. What I want to say this morning, maybe a bit of a confession first. This month we're focusing on giving thanks. In all things, give thanks. And so I've tried to pick, especially last week, some things we don't often give thanks for, like the fact that, life is short, and so what we do here matters. And this week, for me in particular, it's the idea of forgiveness. And I don't think I would ever tell anybody that I'm not a forgiving person until I start to hear myself talk. And I realize that there are certain, how to excuse this, injustices, certain things that people have said or done. They don't sit right with me, and I don't like it, and I carry those around. And I'll take them out once in a while, and I'll look at them, and I'll think, that's not right, and that needs to be fixed, and it shouldn't be that way. And, I'm so thankful to have married someone who has the wisdom to tell me very often, those aren't your rocks. Put those down. And so because of that, I want to kind of speak in metaphor here this morning as we talk about giving thanks for forgiveness. And I'm saying this up front because you may not see yourself as an unforgiving person, but I'm going to tell you, most of us have rocks that aren't ours to pick up. And so today, if you'll just kind of examine that with me, I hope you'll be blessed by the words of Matthew 11, 28 through 30, which is a familiar text. You all know about the yoke that Jesus gives. We're going to look at that in detail this morning. It'll be our main outline. But I want to look at that as an application to what Jesus says later in Matthew 18 about forgiving one another. And I think it's a great commentary on how it all works. So that's the goal today and what I want to do. And so for a setup, I would just say this. I don't even remember when I first got mine, but I know that I've had it for many, many years. And I'm certain that everyone sitting here today has one too. There are days that you notice it more than others. It's either heavier or lighter. But all the same, you have one. And of course, what I'm talking about is all of your bags, those sacks that you carry around and fill with rocks in this life. And that's one thing that I'm convinced every one of us does. We all carry it around, and we store these rocks in them. And some of you are thinking, well, what's that all about? How do we do that? Why do we do that? Well, let me just kind of explain where these rocks come from. And they come from all over. Again, I don't remember where I got my first one, but it might have been something like this for you. Maybe you thought you were going to hit the game winner, and you struck out, and that was a rock. Maybe there was a guy you liked, and you told him, or a girl you asked out, and they laughed at you. And, well, I just happen to know that's two rocks right there. And you became a child of God. And you wanted to convert everyone you know. You couldn't wait to share the story, and yet doors were shut in your face. And maybe even some relationships were lost as you tried. And that's just more rocks that go in that bag. You had a fight with your best friend, or your parents, or siblings, and maybe even a fight that's never gone away. It just sits there still today. That's just another rock. You fell in love, you got married, and you had that first argument. And you hold on to that, and it sits in that bag. Somebody said something unkind or questioned your motive when you know it was pure. You meant nothing by it, and that's just another rock. Someone gossiped about you. You set some goals and almost made it. But that just becomes another weight you carry around. You wanted to lead a song, and it was the wrong song. It's a rock. That's the way that works. And here's the point about all of this. Your bag fills up pretty quick, doesn't it? Like when you look at hurts and disappointments and discouragements, and even those that are meant to be painful towards you, those are things we pick up and we carry around all through this life. And so here's what we do. We do some strange things with this great big bag of rocks. Some people will go to work for insane amount of hours thinking I could just leave all these rocks at home and get away. And the truth is that doesn't work. You can't escape the bag. It's there. It's with you all the time. And so many people will try to drown their bag. Not in water, but in alcohol. And you can't drown these rocks. Countless Christians have cupboards full of pills, but that doesn't work either. Some try to make the best of it. And so they just get a designer bag, thinking that'll make it lighter. Or we're in Colorado, you just put stickers all over it. But it doesn't lighten the load. It's heavy, and you carry it everywhere you go. And so we look at some of the sad things we've done in our life. These are things, as you look at them, don't make any sense now and really didn't make sense when you did them, those things. They're things you're sorry about, things you wish you'd never done or been a part of, things you're embarrassed to think about, things you don't even want to talk about or look at. And so we just add more rocks to this bag. And so here's what I want us to focus on this morning. This will be the outline. Come unto me, Jesus says, all of you who are tired and have heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Accept my teachings and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest for your lives. The burden that I ask you to accept is easy, and the load I give you is light. And so let's just kind of divide that up and think about letting it go. Come to me. Jesus says, first verse, come to me, all of you who are tired and have heavy loads, all who labor under the heavy weight of the disappointments and the discouragements and the hurts and the pains. Jesus says, come to me with that, and I will give you rest. To all those who labor under that heavy weight. You see, the truth is, this bag we carry around in our lives keeps us from having spiritual energy. It just zaps you. It's heavy all the time. You get so worn out carrying it around. You have no strength to go, to do, to preach, to teach, to shine, as Jesus would have us do. Because the truth is, we just get preoccupied with all this weight we carry around. You know, we actually start taking the rocks out of the bag and looking at them. And here's this thing this sister or brother said to me. And it stung. Or here's that congregation that we used to worship at, and they did all these things wrong, and we're not going to let that go. We're going to look at that again. And we talk about the rocks, and we show them to others, and then we just put them all back in our bag and act like that's what moving forward is all about. But Jesus is saying you don't have to carry all of that around with you. It gets so heavy. And nothing we do to dress it up or pretend it's not there actually makes it any better. Only when we work in harmony with the will of Jesus does it get any lighter. And that's the promise here. And so I guess what I'm asking you this morning is, have you lost any of that weight yet? Or are you still dragging it around? Are you still carrying around all those rocks? And I know I'm speaking to a lot of people that are Christians, and here's the truth. People believe in Jesus Christ. They're buried with him, have their sins forgiven, washed away, faithfully attend church services, become students of the Word, and yet somehow remain unhappy or unjoyful people. And the fact is, they're holding on to things that they need to let go of. You know, there's one command in the Bible that is given and immediately repeated. You guys know what that is. Philippians 4:4, be full of joy in the Lord. I will say it again, be full of joy. You know, it's just silly for us who have been released of all these burdens to keep carrying it around. It doesn't make life better. And we seem to miss the most important part. How can we be happy? How can we rejoice? How can we be joy-filled when we have this heavy bag of grievances we carry with us everywhere we go? I've become a child of God. Well, that should make it better. And yet for some, it just becomes a whole nother burden of all the thou shalt nots and then the extra pressure that the church says, well, you ought to do these things here. In fact, it seems like I need a bigger bag after I become a Christian than I did in the first place. Because too many Christians have specialized in telling people, I know you're saved by grace, but you should really focus on the works part just in case the grace thing doesn't work out. And so we say, look at all this ministry I've done, and look at all these classes I've taught, or all these sermons I've preached, and all these people I've baptized. And so just take a long, hard look at all your works in case grace isn't actually enough. And here's the point about this bag. It proves to us that there's no amount of work or effort we could ever do to lighten it and its load. And so some try to hide it. And some try to pretend it's not there. And we gather regularly. We sit around as Christians. We tuck our bag of rocks under our seat. And we sing all the right songs. We sing, I've got the joy of Jesus down in my heart. I've got the joy of Jesus. Where? It's down in my heart. And we go home miserable. And then we get this urge to tell someone else about what we believe and who we follow. And so we talk to our friends about God, and they ask us, what church do you go to? And we tell them, come and study the Bible with us. And what do you suppose goes through their mind? It's all those negative things you've said throughout the years. About the preacher, about the leaders, about the sermons, about the decisions. You've complained about Bible classes and teachers and the singing and every member. And when you say, come be with us, what floods through their mind is, but that person's carrying around a lot of heavy weight. I don't need that too. And we wonder why. Why when we ask them, come and be like me, do they say, no? We're shocked. And it becomes another rock in this bag. See, nobody wants to be a part of that. Just think about this. God did not create us to carry around this burden of rocks throughout our whole lifetime. And so Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. There's no maybe here. Look, if you're struggling with carrying around what's not yours to carry, listen to what Jesus says. He doesn't say maybe. He doesn't say we'll see, which if you're young, that is a delayed no. He says, I will. Come to me and I will give you rest. And that leads to the second part of this text. He says, take my yoke, or accept my teachings is the idea. Accept my teachings and learn from me. And the burden that I ask you to accept is easy. The load I give you to carry is light. The yoke is an interesting concept for our modern term. Two things come to mind. The first is the idea, and it would have been very visual, is that it's a work implement. It was meant to yoke two animals together to pull something heavier than the one could do. It was a shared workload. The other idea that comes from this as Jesus talks is it was a rabbi's teachings. You were to be yoked with your teacher and to believe and think the same things. And so both these things combine in this text. But the problem is, Jesus says, I'll give you rest. And then he says, come work. And we say, wait, I thought we were resting. What's all of this about a new load? Well, the yoke is well suited. They were made, the physical ones, by hand to fit the oxen that did the work. And so just maybe this idea of rest is relative. Maybe what Jesus is saying is, there's a work you can do with me that is so much better and so much lighter than the heavy work of carrying around all your doubts and disappointments and hurts throughout this life. And so let it go. See, Jesus wants us to take his yoke, his responsibilities. You know, no matter how you boil it down, life will always be filled with responsibilities. That's just a reality. It can, however, be free from burdens, the burdens that we don't need to carry. And I know that because Jesus just told us that. And Jesus takes the weight of our burdens. He takes them off of us. And in return, we get a new set of responsibilities. And that's the way this life's supposed to work. You see, the yoke that Jesus gives us is this new set of responsibilities. To accept his teachings, to take his yoke, to make it our goal to let our light shine in such a way that the world sees that light and recognizes God and gives him glory. Christ's yoke is to live with his enthusiasm, his compassion, his caring, his sensitivity, his generosity. That's the yoke of Jesus. It's sharing him with our friends and praying for boldness to never deny that Jesus is Lord in all we do. He says, take my yoke, accept my teaching. And then he says, learn from me. Look at verse 29. Accept my teachings and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest for your lives. Learn from Jesus. I will tell you, this is something joyless Christians have done well. They've learned some things about Jesus, but never fully learned of Jesus. And you think about what you know about Jesus. We know he was born of a virgin. We know he lived on this earth in physical form about 33 years. We know that he never traveled more than 100 miles from his home. We know he died a cruel death on a Roman cross and that he was buried in a borrowed tomb. And yeah, we know it was borrowed because he planned to give it back. He was raised from the dead 3 days later. So the truth is, we know plenty of things about Jesus. But as he gives us this call, can we say we know him? So Jesus says, I want you to sit down and learn from me. Learn of me. See how close he was to the Father. You know, the four Gospels are a great place to sit down. Pick any one of them and follow the life of Jesus and start to ask yourself, am I learning who he is, who he wants me to be? And so let's do it for a moment together. Walk with Jesus along the Galilean coast. Sit by his side on the mountain as he preaches that timeless message. They are blessed who realize their spiritual poverty, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. They are blessed who grieve, for God will comfort them. They are blessed who are humble, for the whole earth will be theirs. They are blessed who hunger and thirst after justice, for they will be satisfied. They are blessed who show mercy to others, for God will show mercy to them. They are blessed whose thoughts are pure, for they will see God. They are blessed who work for peace, for they will be called God's children. They are blessed who are persecuted for doing good, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. That's who Jesus is. See his heartache at Lazarus' tomb. Shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. He knew he was going to raise him from the dead, but his heart was touched by the grief of his family friends. And so they moved the stone away from the entrance, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said these things because of the people here around me. I want them to believe that you sent me. After Jesus said this, he cried out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Witness the frustration on his face, and the disappointment in his voice as he heals people. With the power of God, he makes the lame walk. He pulls demons out of those who were cursed. All along having the Jewish people say to him, he only does this by the power of the devil. Watch him patiently deal with his disciples while they continually just don't get it. Jesus went back in the garden, found his followers asleep. He said, Peter, Simon, why are you sleeping? Couldn't you stay awake with me for an hour? Stay awake and pray for strength against temptation. The spirit wants to do what is right, but the body is weak. Wake up in the hull of the boat and hear the cry, Lord, we're going to drown here. And then watch Jesus come topside and talk to the wind and the waves. He stands up commanding the wind and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And the wind stopped and became completely calm. Or be there when thousands are fed with just a few loaves and a couple fishes, a boy's sack lunch. And when they had had enough to eat, Jesus said to his followers, gather the leftover pieces of fish and bread so that nothing is wasted. So they gathered up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with the pieces left and 5 barley loaves. Learn of him. Seek his compassion as it leaks from his eyes, as he says over Jerusalem, 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 you kill the prophets and stone to death those who are sent to you. Many times I wanted to gather your people as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you did not let me. You were not willing. Or the compassion in his voice as he spoke to a woman about to be stoned to death by a mob of men. As he writes something that translates, anyone here who has never sinned, you throw the first stone. Or follows up with her alone in John 8:11. I also don't judge you guilty. You may go now, but don't sin anymore. Hear him warn Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to take you and test you as a farmer sifts his wheat. I've prayed that you will not lose your faith. Help your brothers. Be stronger when you come back to me. And then focus on Peter, who starts following it more and more of a distance from Jesus. And ask yourself, have I done that? Can people see who I'm following? Am I close enough to him that they know I'm his follower? See the face of Jesus as Peter curses and swears, I never met the man, I don't know him. And then watch Peter weep as he catches the eye of Jesus. Be there with the fierce Christ, who drove out those money changers who twisted and perverted what the worship of God was supposed to look like. See the lame and the blind come to him in the temple to be healed, all the while the Jews hating him more and more for declaring and sharing the power of God. And listen to the people shout, Hosanna, Hosanna. God bless the one who comes in the name of the Lord, only to be the same crowd shouting, crucify, crucify. See, here's the thing that Jesus asks us to do. This is God's commentary on who Jesus is. And Jesus says, come and learn of me. God inspired men to write those things down so that we could look at them and learn from them. And if anyone was ever entitled to carry around a bag full of rocks, hurts, disappointment, letdowns, it was Jesus. But his close relationship with the Father prevented him from carrying around all those things. They were load that weren't his to bear. He let them go. By continual fellowship with God, he resisted the human urge to pick up every rock and carry it with you. And so what he's teaching us is that there is a better burden. In fact, I put it to you this way. If you're tired of carrying around all the burdens of this life, it's time to pick up the burden of love and forgiveness. The burden that I ask you to accept, Jesus says, is easy, and the load I give you to carry is light. See, Jesus takes all of our burdens, but there's another burden in its place. There are responsibilities and challenges and opportunities, but they are light in contrast to doing life the way we used to do it. My burdens are a chore. My burdens are heavy. My burdens are suffocating. Most doctors will tell you the burdens you carry are making you sick. Worry and fret and anger and bitterness. We weren't meant to live this way. But his burden is forgiveness and love. And when I finally understand with certainty just how much God loves me, and how often and completely. He's forgiven me. Then this burden is a natural response. We love to love because God's shown us something we never knew. 1 John 4:19 says we love because God first loved us, and I'll just break that down in the original language. It says we love because He first loved us. You didn't come up with it. You didn't know anything about it until God stepped in and showed you love. This is the burden now we're asked to carry. And the because, which is really interesting here, becomes our motivation. The because becomes our reason to forgive and to love even when you don't feel like it. Or you think you can get a little more out of it by examining it again and taking it into your own hands again. This is the burden. The motivation is because. Why do we love Him? Because. Why do we love others? Because. Why do we love our family? Because. Why do we love, as Jesus would ask us to do, even our enemies? And some days that burden is light, and some days that burden is a little heavier. But I would just suggest this. If loving others is becoming a chore, then it's time to go back and look at how much God loves you. Because one thing I know with certainty is that I am not always lovable. My mother has always loved me. She may hear this and she needs to know that. But not everybody has. And they've had good reason. You see, when I love the Father, it's just a natural response. He loves us so much. This is the way it works. The children that love their parents, they love them because their parents loved them first. They showed them. It's the only love they know. It's a little reciprocal. It's a little instinctive. And that's what God is like with His children. He shows us love and we respond in that same way. And so why would we go around picking up rocks and carrying them around through life? Why would we do it when we know it only makes us miserable? And just one more warning for those who carry this bag around. There may come a day when you get tired of the weight of all these rocks, and you decide to take one out and throw it at a brother. I'm miserable. He might as well be miserable too. It's foolish. And so the question is, have you lost any weight yet? Have you put that bag down? Have you truly moved on? And I'll just kind of do this exercise with you very quickly. You think for a moment about the worst thing anyone has ever done to you. You get that in your mind. Not pleasant. Now you magnify that 10 times. Magnify it 20 times. We all do that anyway. You might already be there. You take your heaviest rock and now you ask a sincere question before the Lord. What good does it do you to carry that around your whole life? You need to get it resolved. You've got to let that go. You need to make things right where you can. Be at peace with all people as much as it depends on you. And when it doesn't, you let it go. God's got that. You give an opportunity for forgiveness and get rid of the rock. If you carry around rocks, sin, hurts, resentment, regrets, from before you became a Christian, I'm sorry. You should have let that stuff drown in the waters of baptism. Jesus took those all away. Don't pull those back up. And I think one of the biggest problems we suffer with is that sometimes we commit these sins and we're so disappointed and we're so full of remorse that we wonder, how could God ever really let that go? Now listen, the problem is not ever God's lack of forgiveness. It's our lack of faith in God's power to completely forgive. Realize what God's attitude really is about forgiveness. It is complete. It is total. It is unchanging. God loves to forgive. In fact, another way you could word this is Jesus lives again to forgive. That's what He's living again for. And we ought to, as followers of Jesus and children of God, love forgiving, letting that go. And I know how this sounds because I've wrestled with this. if I let it go, things may never be made completely right like I think they need to be. And that's not my rock. God's got that. You see, if you say, I'll forgive, but I don't think I can ever forget it, I guess I would just say, get a life. You should not fill your life with holding on to all these things. No one needs to have that good of a memory. And God, certainly, who knows all things and searches all things, says this about forgiveness. He has taken our sins away as far as the east is from the west. And as far as I know, those two never touch. God's willing to put these things so far beyond us. And so I just want to remind you of an origin principle we studied at the start of the year. We went through the life of Joseph. And that's actually the first time in the Bible where forgiveness is talked about. And it's a little surprising that it takes almost the last chapter to get there. Because after the beauty of creation and God's order and design is chapter after chapter tarnished by sin and hurt and boulders and rocks, Joseph seems to take what is a heavy hit. You remember the story. I don't know of anyone that I've seen sinned against as much as Joseph was by his family, save maybe Jesus himself. But the story tells us what comes around goes around, and soon those brothers that thought they were better off with him dead needed him, and they come to him. And Joseph just takes them in. And they live. There's 17 years in Egypt where Jacob and Joseph are reunited and the brothers are there. They're all living under Joseph's protection. They're all living under Joseph's provision. They're all living under what they don't realize at the time, the gift of forgiveness and mercy. But remember, Jacob dies. And they reveal something, I think, so hurtful to Joseph. They make up a story. They come to Joseph and they say, hey, before Dad died, he talked to all of us without you. And he wanted us to tell you, he really wants you to be nice to us. What had he been doing for 17 years? And how that must have added pain to insult or insult to injury. But notice what he says. He says, guys, it's all gone. You truly meant evil against me. I get that. I accept that. You wanted me dead. You tried it. What you did was wicked. But listen, God made something good out of it. He intended it for good. You are forgiven. And he was kind to them and their children. That's complete, total forgiveness. And I get it. That's a story. And you can distance yourself from that. But when it's you and you're hurt, maybe it's harder. And Peter was honest. Peter struggled with this. He said, I don't get the kind of forgiveness you're talking about, Lord. Like if I were to go in there and forgive someone 7 times, I'd be looking pretty good, right? Jesus says, no, that's not going to cut it, Peter. I'm going to need you to forgive a brother who sins against you 70 times 7. You see, the 7 is just the starting point. You're just getting warmed up. You live as a forgiving person is the point. You forgive, Jesus says, as much as it takes, and here's the reason why. As human beings, we condemn so easily, so quickly. And being distanced by a screen hasn't changed this. You can unfriend so quickly, unfollow so quickly. And we forgive so begrudgingly. And Jesus says, you forgive as much as it takes. Because forgiveness is not about making a situation change and play out the way you wanted it. It's not going in reverse and finally having things be just and right. Forgiveness is saying what happened no longer has power over me. I let it go. God will deal with that someday. I will pray that what you meant to be evil, God will turn into good, but I won't be defined by the hurt and the pain and the rock anymore. And I got to tell you, this is hard forgiveness. This is what you signed on to, by the way. If you're yoked with Jesus, this is the burden of love and forgiveness you're called to. And he says it's easier and it's light, even when sometimes it feels like the hardest thing you have to do. And so maybe the best answer for us is like the apostles said, Lord, give us more faith. Because I'm not living that standard like I need to. yet. Or the poor father who came to Jesus with his son, demon-possessed, and he's like, look, I believe, but help my unbelief. This is something we all need so much more of. And this is why. It's possible, Christian, that you carry around that bag of rocks so long that spiritual growth is impossible. You no longer look like Jesus. You no longer look like a follower of Jesus. In fact, you're worse off than when you started your journey. And so here's the last words I'd give you for encouragement. Hebrews 12. We are surrounded by a great cloud of people whose lives tell us what faith means. And so let us run the race that is before us and never give up. We should remove from our lives anything that would get in the way and the sin that so easily holds us back. Let us look only to Jesus, the one who began our faith and who makes it perfect. He suffered death on the cross, but he accepted the shame as if it were nothing because of the joy that God put before him. And now he is sitting at the right side of God's throne. Think about Jesus' example. He held on while wicked people were doing evil things to him, so do not get tired and stop trying. So what do? Well, if you're tired of carrying around that bag of rocks, Jesus has a better burden for you. Put them down. You've got a race to run. And you're not going to run this race with any kind of endurance if you're carrying extra weight. Instead of looking at all those hurts and disappointments and all the things that you would love to make right, you fix your eyes on Jesus. That's how he endured. He didn't stare at the cross and say, this isn't just. He didn't listen to the ridicule and say, no, that's not true. He trusted his Father to judge rightly and did what was needed for the journey. He endured. And finally, do not grow weary and do not lose heart. You know, spiritually, what this new burden looks like is becoming a forgiven and forgiving person. And I would just say this is the wrestling match I have within myself. I believe I'm fully forgiven by God. It's amazing how I can hold on to some of the forgiveness I need to give others, whether they asked for it or not. It's stuff I don't need to carry. This is what that burden looks like. And I pray this week you'll be thankful for the gift, the lightning load of Jesus to take on love and forgiveness over all the hurts we so often carry. We just need to get rid of that extra weight. And this time, we need to keep it off. I want to add just one more thing. I knew I was going to talk about forgiveness for a couple of weeks now, and so I did a lot of reading and research, and it just seems like what the trendy thing to say right now is, you know what you really need to do is you need to learn to forgive yourself. Like the first step is you forgive you, and then you can move on. And I'm not mocking that anyway. There are some people that need to understand that you can't hold on to all that stuff, but I don't think that's the ultimate answer. That's too self-centered. You need to look at Jesus. See, when I struggle with forgiveness, it's not about forgiving myself. It's about believing that God will do what he said he'll do. As far as the east is from the west, he's removed my sin. Who am I to pull that back out and look at it? God's not to be doubted or mistrusted. Put your faith in the Lord. Trust that forgiveness is what he's all about. It's the work Jesus came into this life to do. If you're forgiven, be forgiving. And all of you, I hope maybe what we've done through this metaphor this morning is just giving you a way to talk to one another. When you're carrying a rock you shouldn't carry. When you're throwing rocks you shouldn't throw. Think about what Jesus came to do. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart, and I will give you rest for your souls. If you're here this morning, you're not a Christian, then I offer you the first opportunity to feel real release. You know, what happens in baptism? What's the mystical or kind of spiritual thing going on? I'll tell you, there are deeper things going on than you realize in the moment. Over the course of years, I've looked back and thought, wow, what a day. What a glorious day. I didn't even realize right then. And one of those is all this weight of regret and sin and burden Jesus lifts. Now, the problem over the years is you start grabbing things back. Put the rocks down. If you want to put on Christ today, we'd encourage you to do so. If you're here and you need our prayers, maybe you need help. Maybe letting go is just something you're really fighting with. I can tell you, you're not alone. You're not alone. I can see bags out there. Talk with one another. Pray to God. Ask God to help us be loving and forgiving as Jesus is to us. If we can help you in any way, you let us